7 years ago, Ethan Matthews believed he had won. He told Ava Daniels she was broken, barren, unworthy of his name. He left her for a woman who fit his polished image, convinced Ava would fade into obscurity. But Ethan never imagined that the woman he discarded would rise from the ashes, transform into the untouchable supermodel known as Zara, and return with a legacy worth $500 million. This is not a story of revenge with weapons or rage. This is a story of grace, resilience, and the kind of triumph that makes the world stop and stare. Ava sat by the window, watching the world outside. The evening had settled into a soft glow, the city skyline sparkling under the twilight. She absent-mindedly ran her fingers over the cool glass, tracing patterns in the condensation. The bustling streets below, the honking cars, the people rushing to and fro, they all seemed like a different world now, a world she no longer belonged to. Her mind wandered back to a time when everything felt right, when she believed that she and Ethan Matthews had the perfect life. The first time she had met Ethan seemed like it happened in a dream. She had been so young, only just beginning her career as a junior publicist at a charity gala in Manhattan. It was one of those events where everyone was trying to be seen, trying to matter, and Ava had felt small, like a nobody amidst the sea of power players and city elites. But then Ethan had walked in, and suddenly the whole room had shifted. Ava had noticed him immediately, how could she not? His presence was magnetic, his suit perfectly tailored to his frame, his confident stride effortlessly commanding attention. He was the kind of man people followed, the kind of man people wanted to impress. He was everything Ava wasn't, perfectly polished, already a success in the world of finance, with a family name that opened doors. She remembered the exact moment he had caught her gaze, a playful glint in his eyes, his lips curving into a smile. And then he'd approached her, his voice smooth like silk. "You look like you don't belong here," he had said, his words casual but direct, and yet there was something intriguing in his tone. Ava, flustered, had stammered a response. "And you look like you own the place," she had said, surprised by her own boldness. Ethan had laughed, low and rich. And in that moment, Ava had felt something shift in her. There was an unspoken connection between them, something more than just a flirtation. It felt like destiny had brought them together. From that moment on, Ethan had swept her off her feet. Their relationship progressed quickly, the whirlwind romance of a young, ambitious woman and a successful man who seemed to have it all. Dinner at expensive restaurants, weekends away, trips abroad, designer gifts, everything she had never imagined possible. He made her feel like she was the center of his world, and for a while, Ava had believed it. She had convinced herself that he was the one, that this love was real, that they were destined to be together. But over time, things began to change. The cracks started to show, even though Ava was reluctant to admit it. Ethan, who had once been so attentive, had begun to pull away. His focus had shifted, first to his career, and then to his family's expectations. Ava tried to ignore the growing distance between them. She clung to the image of their perfect life, convinced that if she just held on tighter, everything would be fine. But it wasn't fine. It all started with the conversations about children. Ethan had always talked about building a family, about the future he envisioned for them. At first, it had seemed like a beautiful idea. Ava had always dreamed of being a mother, and the thought of raising a family with Ethan had filled her with hope. But the discussions started to feel less like dreams and more like pressure. One evening, at a family dinner, Ethan's mother had asked the question. "So Ava," she had said, her voice sweet but sharp, "when will we get to have grandchildren?" The words had felt like a dagger to Ava's heart. She had never expected to feel so exposed, so vulnerable. Her cheeks flushed, and she had stammered an answer, unsure of how to respond. But Ethan, ever the diplomat, had stepped in, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We're working on it," he had said, but his smile had been tight, almost rehearsed. Later that night, in their penthouse overlooking the city, Ethan had become distant. The tension in the air was palpable. Ava had asked if something was wrong, but Ethan had dismissed her concerns, as he often did. She had tried to ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right, but it was becoming harder to do so. The next few months had been a blur of doctors' visits, tests, and waiting. Ava had never doubted her body before, but now the uncertainty had taken root in her mind. She had been through all the tests, and the results were clear. She was healthy. There was nothing physically wrong with her. She could have children, but Ethan didn't seem to believe it. He had insisted she see specialists, as if her word and the doctor's weren't enough. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world felt still, and the only sound in their penthouse was the soft hum of the city below. Ethan had returned from work, tired and preoccupied, and they had sat down for dinner. After a few minutes of small talk, he had turned to her with a cold, detached look in his eyes. "Ava," he said flatly, his voice distant, "I think we need to face the truth. You're barren, you'll never give me the family I want. I can't waste any more time on this." The words hit Ava like a punch to the gut. Barren. The word echoed in her mind over and over. She had always been so sure of herself, so sure of her worth. But in that moment, she felt like everything she had believed in had crumbled. She tried to speak, tried to make him see that this wasn't true, that they could still have a family. But the look in his eyes told her everything. He had already made up his mind. Ethan didn't see her anymore. He didn't see her as the woman he had fallen in love with. She was no longer the woman who could give him the life he wanted. She was just a piece in his perfect puzzle that didn't fit anymore. Ava had felt like her world had come crashing down around her. The man she loved, the man she had given everything to, had discarded her so easily. She had tried to hold on to the image of their perfect life, but now, the truth was inescapable. She wasn't enough for him. Not because of who she was, but because she couldn't give him the one thing he wanted most: children. She had cried that night, tears streaming down her face as she sat in the cold emptiness of their penthouse. She had never felt so alone, so lost. She replayed everything in her mind, how they had met, how they had fallen in love, how she had trusted him completely. And now, here she was, broken and rejected. The days that followed were a blur of pain and disbelief. Ethan had become more distant, more absorbed in his work. He didn't seem to care that she was falling apart. And Ava, once full of life and hope, now felt like a shadow of herself. It wasn't until she packed her things and walked out of their penthouse that she truly realized how far she had fallen. She had walked away with nothing but her dignity, but even that felt fragile. She had nothing left but the pieces of herself that Ethan hadn't taken away. She had moved into a small apartment, one that was far from the life she had once known, but it was hers. It was hers to rebuild. But even in the midst of her heartbreak, something stirred inside her, a spark of determination. She wouldn't let this define her. She wouldn't let Ethan's rejection be the end of her story. As the days went on, Ava began to take control of her life again. She started small, cutting her hair, changing her wardrobe. She began to look at herself in the mirror, not as the woman Ethan had rejected, but as someone who still had power, who still had value. She was not broken, she was not barren, and she would prove it to the world. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took time, months of hard work, of pushing herself to become someone stronger, someone better. She had to become someone who could look at herself with pride, someone who could look back at her past without regret. And then, one day, she decided that she would no longer be Ava Daniels. She would be someone new, someone who could rise from the ashes of her past and rebuild herself into something unstoppable. She would become Zara, the woman she was always meant to be. Zara wasn't just a name. It was a symbol of her rebirth, of her strength, of her refusal to be defined by anyone else's expectations. She would make the world see her, not as Ethan's discarded lover, but as the woman who had overcome everything to become more than anyone could ever imagine. This was just the beginning, and she would make sure the world knew it. Ava stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring at her reflection. Her dark brown hair cascaded down her back in waves, her eyes were tired, but the spark of something else was starting to flicker within them. Something that had been dormant for far too long. The woman in the mirror wasn't the same as the one she had been just months ago. She wasn't the woman Ethan had rejected, the woman he had told was barren and broken. No, this woman was stronger. This woman had survived, and now she was ready to fight. But the question was, what was she fighting for? For herself? To reclaim her identity? To prove to the world that she could stand on her own 2 feet, no longer defined by someone else's vision of who she should be. Ethan's rejection had cut deep, but instead of destroying her, it had ignited a fire. And now that fire was burning brightly. The apartment around her was sparse, small, functional, but not hers, not in the way her penthouse had been. This was a new chapter in a new life. She had traded her designer suits for something more modest, her luxurious lifestyle for the struggle of starting over. But somehow this new life felt more authentic, more real. She wasn't pretending anymore. She wasn't trying to fit into a world that didn't welcome her. Ava reached for the scissors she had kept hidden in a drawer. She had been thinking about this for days, even weeks. It was time for a change, not just in appearance, but in every way possible. She wanted to shed her old self, the Ava who had loved blindly, the Ava who had been content to sit quietly by Ethan's side, allowing his success to define her. She would no longer be that woman. With a deep breath, Ava began cutting. She snipped away at her long hair, her movements quick but steady. Each strand that fell to the floor felt like a weight lifted off her shoulders. She was no longer bound to the past. She was free. As the last of her hair hit the floor, she looked at herself again. Her new, shorter hairstyle framed her face differently, more assertive, more confident. It was a small change, but it was the beginning of something much bigger. She felt different now, lighter somehow, and the more she looked at herself, the more she realized how much she had changed. It wasn't just the hair, it was her whole mindset. She wasn't the same woman who had cried alone in that penthouse, who had let Ethan's words chip away at her self-worth. She was Zara now, and Zara wasn't going to let anyone or anything hold her back. Weeks passed, and with each passing day, Ava's transformation deepened. She started working on herself, not just physically, but emotionally. She began exercising regularly, not as a form of punishment, but as a way to reclaim control over her body. She ate well, slept more, and took care of her mental health. She began reading books on self-empowerment, watching documentaries about women who had overcome adversity. Every story she consumed only fueled her desire to be more. She started working as a freelance model, taking on smaller gigs that other women might have dismissed. Catalog shoots, promotional campaigns, even local runway shows. Nothing was too small, nothing was beneath her. Each job she took was a step toward reclaiming her confidence, a step toward rebuilding her sense of self-worth. And though the pay wasn't much, the satisfaction she gained from each shoot was immeasurable. She felt the power in her own skin again. It wasn't easy, of course. The modeling industry was brutal, and Ava, now Zara, faced rejection after rejection. She was told she was too dark, too curvy, too inexperienced. She wasn't the right look. She wasn't what they were looking for, but Zara didn't let any of that stop her. She wasn't going to be the woman who gave up. She wasn't going to allow anyone to tell her what she could or couldn't do. The rejections stung, but each one only made her stronger. She was determined to make it, to prove that she didn't need anyone's approval. She didn't need Ethan's validation, and she certainly didn't need anyone else to tell her she wasn't good enough. One afternoon, Zara was scrolling through her social media accounts when she stumbled upon an article about a designer in Paris who was looking for fresh faces to walk in his upcoming fashion show. It was a long shot, but Zara wasn't about to let it slip by. She sent an email with her portfolio attached, half expecting to never hear back. But to her surprise, a few days later, she got a reply. The designer wanted her to come to Paris for an audition. Paris, the city of lights, the city of dreams. Zara had arrived. The atmosphere was electric, the air crisp and fresh as she stepped off the plane. She couldn't help but smile to herself as she walked through the airport. This was it. This was the moment she had been working for. She wasn't going to let anything hold her back. She had made it this far, and now nothing was going to stop her. The audition was everything Zara had hoped for. The energy in the room was palpable, the other models just as beautiful and poised as she had imagined. It was a world unlike anything she had ever known, but it was the world she was going to conquer. She stood tall, despite her nerves, and did everything she could to make an impression. She walked the runway with confidence, exuding the energy and power she had worked so hard to cultivate. The designer was impressed. He called her back for a second audition, then a third, and before she knew it, she was walking for his show in Paris Fashion Week. It wasn't the big break she had dreamed of, but it was a start, and in the world of modeling, that was all she needed. Zara's star began to rise. She walked in more shows, worked with more designers, and her name started to gain recognition. But she didn't let the fame go to her head. She stayed focused, kept working hard, and kept pushing herself to be better. It wasn't just about the runway anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could do this, that she was more than what Ethan had seen in her. Months later, Zara was sitting in a cafe in Milan, sipping her coffee and flipping through a magazine when she saw a headline that made her heart race. Zara Daniels, the supermodel who defied the odds. It was surreal. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had dreamed of. She was no longer just Ava, she was Zara. She was a force in the modeling world, a woman who had risen from the ashes of heartbreak to become a global icon. But the success wasn't just about the fame. It was about her independence, her freedom, her strength. She had come so far, and the journey wasn't over yet. As Zara's career continued to soar, she met someone new, Adrian Knight. A businessman, tall and handsome, with a quiet confidence that mirrored her own. He was different from anyone she had ever known. He didn't care about her fame, her looks, or her success. He saw her for who she was, the woman who had overcome adversity and built an empire from the ground up. Adrian's admiration for her was unlike anything she had ever experienced. He was kind, patient, and understood her on a level that no one else had. He didn't try to fix her, he loved her exactly as she was. And for the first time in years, Zara felt safe. She felt like she could trust him. Zara and Adrian's relationship grew stronger with each passing day. They were a power couple, their names linked together in the media, but their connection was genuine. Adrian was her rock, and she knew that, for the first time in her life, she was truly loved. Then came the news that would change everything. Zara was pregnant. She had always feared that she wouldn't be able to have children, but now, here she was about to become a mother. She was carrying twins. The joy she felt in that moment was overwhelming. She wasn't barren, she wasn't broken. She was whole and she had everything she needed. But even in the midst of her happiness, there was one final chapter she hadn't anticipated. A letter arrived at her door one morning. The envelope was embossed in gold, and as she opened it, her heart sank. It was an invitation to Ethan Matthews' wedding. The invitation was addressed to Ava Daniels. He wanted to humiliate her. Ethan had no idea that the woman he had discarded was now Zara, a billionaire supermodel and a mother-to-be. He had no idea that she had not only survived his cruelty, but had built an empire that would leave him in the dust. He thought this wedding would be his victory. He thought the invitation would be a way to rub her failure in her face. But he was wrong. Zara's smile was the only answer she needed. She wasn't going to let Ethan have the last word. She wasn't going to let him define her. She was going to show him what it really meant to be unstoppable. The sun shone brightly that morning as Zara sat in the cozy living room of her New York penthouse, sipping her coffee. Adrian was sitting across from her, typing away on his laptop, a soft hum of the city outside their window. Their twins were with the nanny in another room, playing and laughing as the sounds of their joy filtered through the walls. Life was perfect, or so it seemed. Zara's eyes wandered over to the elegant coffee table where a golden envelope lay. At first glance, it seemed like just another invitation, maybe an event, a gala, or even a charity dinner. But as she picked it up and turned it over, she felt a familiar, unwelcome pang in her chest. The envelope was embossed with the words, "Ethan Matthews' wedding invitation." She felt her heart skip a beat. She stared at the golden lettering, not quite believing what she was seeing. A slow realization crept over her. This was it. Ethan was getting married. And what was worse, he had invited her. Zara's fingers tightened around the envelope as memories of the past flooded her mind. Memories of the man who had once held her heart, and the man who had left her broken and discarded. Ethan had always been about appearances, about perfection. He had told her she was barren, that she would never give him the family he wanted, and that she would never be enough. He had chosen Sophie, a woman he thought would fit into his world of power and prestige. Sophie, the woman he believed would give him the perfect life. But now, here she was, Zara, the woman he had cast aside, about to attend his wedding. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had risen from the ashes of his cruelty, built an empire, and found happiness in a way that Ethan could never have imagined. She had created a life that was far more fulfilling than anything he could have ever given her. And now, he thought she would attend his wedding to see him and Sophie live out their fairy tale. He had invited her to rub his happiness in her face. But Zara knew something he didn't. She wasn't the woman she used to be. She was Ava anymore. She was a woman of strength, a woman of grace, and she was going to show him just how wrong he was. Her eyes flicked up to Adrian, who was still absorbed in his work. She leaned back against the chair, the invitation still clutched in her hands. "Adrian," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, though she wasn't sure if it was from anger or something else. Adrian looked up from his screen, his expression warm but attentive. He could see something was bothering her. "What's wrong?" he asked, putting the laptop aside and giving her his full attention. Zara took a deep breath, her fingers still wrapped around the invitation. She didn't need to say much. Adrian could read her like an open book. "This came today," she said, handing him the envelope. "Ethan's wedding invitation. He's marrying Sophie." She paused, the bitterness in her tone barely contained. "He wants me there to humiliate me, to show me what I lost, to show me how happy he is with the life he's built with her." Adrian didn't flinch, didn't offer any empty words of sympathy. He simply took the envelope, opened it slowly, and read the invitation. When he finished, he looked up at her with calm but unwavering eyes. "I don't need to tell you how much you've changed," he said. "You've gone beyond what anyone thought was possible, beyond what he thought you were capable of. He doesn't get to define you anymore, Zara. He doesn't get to have any control over your happiness. He had his chance and he threw it away." Zara's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. She wasn't going to let Ethan's ghost ruin the life she had fought so hard to build. Adrian was right. She had moved on. She had found strength in herself that she never knew existed. But this invitation, it was a test. a test of her resilience, a test of whether she could face the past without letting it drag her down. Zara stood up, her decision forming with every step she took. She walked over to the window, gazing out at the sprawling city below. She wasn't going to let Ethan see her weak. She wasn't going to let him see how much his words had hurt her all those years ago. Instead, she was going to walk into his wedding, unfazed, untouchable, and victorious. "I'm going," Zara said firmly, her voice clear and resolute. Adrian's eyes softened as he moved to stand beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and grounding. "You don't have to do this, you know," he said softly. "You've already proven everything, you've already won." Zara nodded, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions but her resolve strong. "I'm doing this for me, not for him. I need to show him that I'm not the woman he thought I was, that I'm not some broken ex. I am the woman who rose from the ashes. I am the woman he'll never forget." Adrian smiled, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You are more than just a woman he'll never forget. You're the woman who'll leave a legacy." The day of the wedding arrived. Zara stood in front of the mirror once again, this time with a calmness that surprised even her. Her reflection was impeccable. Her gown was a stunning gold that shimmered like liquid, hugging her figure in all the right places. She looked nothing like the woman who had walked away from Ethan's cold rejection. She was not Ava anymore. The transformation was complete. She had become Zara, a name that was no longer just a part of her, it was a symbol of her strength, her survival, and her triumph over everything Ethan had tried to destroy. She took one last look at her reflection, the soft smile on her lips confirming the resolve in her heart. She wasn't walking into this wedding as a victim, as someone who had been left behind. No, she was walking in as a queen, untouchable, unbreakable, and unstoppable. When she entered the venue, the room seemed to pause for a moment. Ethan was standing at the altar, his back to the guests. Sophie, radiant and beautiful, was by his side. But it wasn't them who commanded the room's attention. It was Zara. The whispers started almost immediately, a ripple of astonishment spreading across the guests. Cameras flashed, voices murmured, and all eyes turned to Zara as she walked gracefully into the room, holding her head high. Ethan's smile faltered as he turned to see her. Recognition hit him like a wave, and for a moment the world seemed to freeze. He was speechless. Sophie looked confused, her smile dropping as she too realized who had entered the room. Zara didn't look at Ethan. She didn't need to. She wasn't here for him. She wasn't here to stir up the past. She was here to claim her place in the world. She was here to show them all who she had become. The guests flocked to her, eager for photos, for selfies, for a piece of the woman they had all heard about but never truly understood. Zara, the supermodel, the mogul, the woman who had overcome everything and built an empire. Sophie stood frozen, watching the scene unfold before her. Ethan, humiliated, watched as his wedding turned into Zara's stage. Sophie's face paled, and she looked at Ethan with growing realization. "You lied," she whispered sharply, but loud enough for those closest to hear. "You told me she was barren, you destroyed her, and used me." The words echoed through the room, and Sophie's gaze turned cold. She walked away from Ethan, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The whispers grew louder, and Ethan's world began to unravel. Zara stood there, her presence commanding, her strength undeniable. She didn't need to say a word. She had already won. The air was thick with whispers as Zara stood tall, a beacon of elegance amidst the chaos of Ethan's wedding. She had never expected her entrance to be anything less than dramatic, but the sheer magnitude of what transpired left her momentarily breathless. Ethan, once so sure of his power, was now powerless. His perfect world, so carefully crafted, was crumbling before his eyes, and Zara was the catalyst for that destruction. The guests, who had once been in awe of Ethan's polished exterior, now turned their attention to the woman who had surpassed every expectation. Zara, the woman he had discarded, the woman he had humiliated, had returned not only as his equal but as someone far beyond him. As the initial shock wore off, the crowd began to surround her. Cameras flashed, their lenses desperate to capture the transformation of the woman who had risen from the ashes. She stood poised and graceful, allowing the attention to wash over her without a flicker of doubt in her expression. Her transformation had been hard-earned, and she would not allow anyone, not even Ethan, to take that away from her. Adrian, standing slightly behind her, couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had been by her side from the very beginning, watching her overcome her past, her heartbreak, and her fears. But this moment, this victory over the man who had once dismissed her, was the culmination of all her hard work. She wasn't just the woman who had conquered the fashion industry. She was the woman who had conquered herself. Sophie, still standing at the altar, looked from Ethan to Zara with wide eyes, her expression unreadable. It was clear now that the glamorous life she had imagined with Ethan was not the life she had thought it to be. The woman she had been told was barren had just walked into the wedding with a presence that eclipsed the entire event. Sophie's eyes narrowed as the realization hit her. Ethan had lied. She was not the first choice. She was the replacement. And now Ava was standing here in front of everyone, and Ethan was powerless to do anything about it. As the crowd continued to murmur and take photos, Sophie turned to Ethan, her voice barely audible but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You lied to me," she said. "You told me she was barren. You built this life on lies, and I was just another part of your game." Ethan's face flushed a deep shade of red. His jaw clenched as he attempted to form words, but nothing came. The man who had once been the center of attention now stood on the sidelines of his own life. The shame of being exposed as a fraud was too much for him to bear. Sophie's harsh words echoed through the room as she walked away, her heels clicking loudly against the polished floor, leaving Ethan standing there alone. Zara turned away from the crowd, her focus now on the man who had once broken her. Ethan, staring at her with a mix of disbelief and shame, tried to step forward, but his feet felt as if they were glued to the floor. For a long moment, they locked eyes, no words were exchanged, but the weight of their shared history hung heavily between them. Zara felt no need to speak. The truth was evident in her every step, every breath. She wasn't here to relive the past or to extract revenge. She was here to show the world the power of resilience, the strength that comes from rising above the cruelest of rejections. "Zara," Ethan finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't flinch. "Ethan," she replied, her voice calm, steady, and unwavering. He opened his mouth to say something more, but the words died in his throat. His world had just been shattered. His perfect facade, his perfect life, his perfect image, everything he had built was crumbling, and the person responsible was standing in front of him, unshaken, while he fell apart. Sophie was gone. The guests, once his loyal followers, had abandoned him. The media, which had once portrayed him as a symbol of success, now saw him as a cautionary tale. The humiliation was too much to bear. Ethan Matthews, the man who had once been on top of the world, now stood at its lowest point, while Zara stood tall, untouched by the chaos around her. Zara didn't stay long at the wedding. There was no need. The message had been delivered. She had walked in as the woman Ethan had cast aside, and she was walking out as the woman he could never forget. Adrian was at her side as they made their way to the exit. The paparazzi, still desperate for their shots, snapped photos as they left, but Zara didn't care. The world could see her, and they would see her for the woman she had become, not the woman Ethan had rejected, not the woman who had been discarded, but the woman who had built herself from the ground up. "Are you okay?" Adrian asked as they stepped into the car. Zara smiled softly, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and triumph. "I'm more than okay. I'm exactly where I need to be." The drive back to their penthouse was quiet, the city lights flashing by as Zara reflected on everything that had brought her to this moment. The pain of Ethan's words, the years of struggle, the sacrifices, everything had led her here. She had built an empire, not just of wealth and fame, but of personal strength. She had reclaimed her dignity, her worth, and her future. As they pulled into their building, Zara felt a sense of calm wash over her. She didn't need to prove anything to Ethan. She had already proven it to herself, but the journey wasn't over. As they entered their home, the sound of the twins' laughter filled the space, a stark contrast to the cold silence of the wedding. They were her legacy, her future, the living proof of the woman she had become. Adrian kissed her forehead. "You were incredible today," he said, his voice full of admiration. Zara looked at him, a quiet smile on her lips. "Thank you, but the real victory is in what comes next." The days following the wedding were a whirlwind for Zara. The media buzzed with headlines about Ethan's downfall, about Sophie walking out, about the shocking appearance of Zara at the wedding. The story was everywhere, and Ethan's carefully constructed image began to unravel. His business deals began to falter. Investors pulled out, and his partners started distancing themselves. The man who had once been hailed as a success story was now a pariah. His arrogance, his cruelty, and his lies had caught up to him in the most public of ways. Sophie, disillusioned by Ethan's true nature, took the opportunity to distance herself from him. She had believed in the fairy tale, but now she saw the truth. Ethan wasn't the man he had presented himself to be. He had used her, just as he had used Ava, now Zara. The media continued to report on his downfall, painting him as a cautionary tale of hubris. His name, once associated with success, was now synonymous with failure. And Zara, she had become even more of a global icon. Her face appeared on magazine covers and her name was recognized across the world. But more than that, she became a symbol of resilience. She was the woman who had been told she would never be enough, and now she was everything. Zara's life, with Adrian by her side and their children in their arms, was now a beautiful blend of love, success, and fulfillment. She had moved on from the past, but it had shaped her into the woman she was today. She had proven to herself that no one could define her. Not Ethan, not anyone. Her story wasn't one of revenge, it was a story of redemption and transformation. She had taken the worst moments of her life and turned them into the fuel that drove her to the top. She was unstoppable. And as she looked at her family, Adrian, their twins, and the empire she had built, Zara knew that this was only the beginning. The past had tried to define her, but now she was the one writing her story. Zara stood on the balcony of her penthouse, gazing out at the city's skyline. The night was still, but the lights of the city twinkled like a million stars, each one representing a possibility, a dream, or a promise waiting to be fulfilled. In the distance, she could hear the hum of the city, a constant reminder of how far she had come. Once, she had been a woman who felt invisible, disregarded, and underestimated. Now she was a global icon, a symbol of strength, resilience, and unshakable resolve. Her transformation had been nothing short of extraordinary. She had taken the pain of her past, the rejection, the heartbreak, and turned it into the foundation of her empire. Zara Luxe was more than just a fashion brand. It was a movement, a representation of everything she had fought for. It was a testament to the power of self-reinvention, of the courage to stand tall even when the world tried to knock you down. The first year after the wedding had been a whirlwind of opportunities and challenges. Zara had worked tirelessly to expand Zara Luxe beyond just the fashion world. She had launched a line of luxury skincare products, developed a collection of fragrances, and even started a wellness retreat in Bali that had quickly become a hot spot for celebrities and high-profile influencers. Each venture had been carefully planned, every decision made with a single goal in mind: to create something that would outlast her, something that would inspire future generations of women. The empire she was building was not just about wealth, it was about creating space for women to dream, to believe in their worth, and to chase their own ambitions without fear of being judged or underestimated. The press loved her. Headlines hailed her as the queen of reinvention, the billionaire supermodel, and the woman who took control of her destiny. But more importantly, her brand was growing exponentially. Zara Luxe was now a global name, and with each passing day, it was becoming more and more synonymous with empowerment. Zara had learned from her past mistakes. She had surrounded herself with a team of strong, driven women who shared her vision and worked alongside her to turn Zara Luxe into a brand that would change the industry. They were not just employees, they were partners in her mission. And together, they were unstoppable. Zara's personal life had also flourished. Adrian, her rock, was a constant source of support and love. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and admiration. He had stood by her side when she was at her lowest, and now, as her empire grew, he was there every step of the way, celebrating her successes and comforting her during the tough times. They had created a family together, and Zara's twins were the center of that world. Her children were her greatest achievement, and she loved them more than words could express. Every decision she made, every sacrifice she endured was for them. She wanted them to grow up in a world where they knew their worth, where they knew they were loved, and where they understood the power of resilience. As Adrian and Zara spent time together with their children, whether it was playing in the park, traveling the world, or enjoying quiet nights at home, Zara couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The woman who had once been told she was broken was now the woman who had everything: love, success, and a family that meant more to her than anything else in the world. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Adrian took Zara's hand and led her to the terrace of their penthouse. The city stretched out before them, its lights flickering like 1,000 possibilities. The air was cool, and the sound of the city below seemed distant, as if it were another world. "I've watched you grow, Zara," Adrian said, his voice filled with emotion. "I've watched you build an empire, heal from your past, and become the woman you are today. And every day I am in awe of you." Zara smiled, her heart swelling with love. "You've been there every step of the way. I couldn't have done it without you." Adrian took a deep breath as if gathering the courage to say something important. He kneeled down in front of her, his eyes locking with hers. "Zara, you are the most amazing woman I've ever met. You've shown me what true strength is, what love can be. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building this life together, watching our children grow, and continuing to create something beautiful. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Zara's eyes as she looked at the man who had stood by her side through everything. "Yes, Adrian, yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The city below them seemed to hold its breath, the moment suspended in time. And in that moment, Zara knew that everything she had fought for, everything she had endured, had led her to this place of pure happiness. As the months passed, Zara Luxe continued to soar. The brand was now a household name, with flagship stores in New York, Paris, Milan, and Tokyo. Zara had expanded into new markets, and her business ventures had made her one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world. But she never lost sight of her mission. Her true purpose was to empower women, to help them see their own worth, and to give them the tools to succeed. Zara's philanthropic work had also flourished. The Zara Foundation was now a global force, funding education for girls in developing countries, providing resources for women in need, and supporting causes that aligned with her vision. She believed that wealth and power should be used to uplift others, and she was determined to leave a legacy that went far beyond just money and fame. Her story had become an inspiration to millions. Women all over the world looked up to her, seeing in her the possibility of their own success, their own transformation. And as she stood at the helm of Zara Luxe, Zara knew that her work was just beginning. There were still mountains to climb, still battles to fight, and still lives to change. One evening, as she sat in her office overlooking the city, Zara took a moment to reflect on everything that had brought her to this point. The pain of her past, the rejection, the heartbreak, it all seemed so distant now. She had turned those experiences into something powerful, something that had made her who she was today. As she looked at the framed photo of her family on her desk, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Adrian, her children, and the empire she had built were her everything. But more than that, the strength she had found within herself was the greatest gift of all. Zara knew that life was a journey. It was full of twists and turns, of unexpected challenges and beautiful victories. And as she continued to rise, she knew that the best was yet to come. One day, a letter arrived at Zara's penthouse. It was addressed to Miss Zara and bore an elegant gold embossing. At first glance, it seemed like another piece of fan mail or business correspondence. But as she opened it, her heart skipped a beat. The letter was an invitation to a wedding, Ethan's wedding. Zara stared at the invitation, her mind racing. It had been years since she had seen Ethan, and the invitation to his wedding was unexpected. But as she read the words, something inside her clicked. This wasn't just an invitation, it was an attempt to humiliate her. Ethan had no idea that Zara was Ava. He had no idea that the woman he had discarded and told was barren had risen to become the woman he could never forget. This invitation was meant to flaunt his happiness, to show her how perfect his life had become without her. Zara smiled to herself. If Ethan thought this invitation would hurt her, he was wrong. It only reminded her of how far she had come. And now, she had the perfect chance to show him just how much he had underestimated her. The days leading up to Ethan's wedding felt like an eternity to Zara. The invitation she had received was more than just an envelope with a fancy gold embossed seal. It was a declaration of Ethan's arrogance. He thought he had won, that she had faded into obscurity, that her story was over. But Zara knew better. She wasn't just any woman. She wasn't the Ava who had once loved him blindly. She had become Zara, an untouchable force, a billionaire mogul, a mother to twins, and the symbol of everything Ethan had underestimated. The wedding was scheduled to take place at a grand avenue on the outskirts of New York. The location was luxurious, the kind of place where the rich and powerful gathered to celebrate their triumphs. Zara knew Ethan had spared no expense. The man who had discarded her for a woman who could give him the family he wanted had created an illusion of perfection, one that he believed would humiliate her. But what Ethan didn't know was that Zara had become something far more powerful than he could ever imagine. Zara was no stranger to the spotlight, but this was different. This wasn't about walking down the runway in a couture dress or posing for the cover of a magazine. This was about showing Ethan that she had come out of the ashes of his rejection not as a victim, but as a queen. She wanted to walk into that venue not with anger or resentment, but with grace and dignity. She had won, and now the world was going to see just how much. Adrian had been by her side through it all. He understood the significance of this moment, even though Zara had not spoken much about the invitation. He could sense the mix of emotions running through her, the desire for redemption, the longing for closure, and the quiet determination to show Ethan that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The night before the wedding, Adrian took her out for a quiet dinner at a small, intimate restaurant. It was their favorite place, away from the glitz and glamour, a place where they could be themselves. Adrian had always supported her, and she needed that more than ever now. She had fought so hard to get to this point, to build an empire from nothing, and now she was about to confront her past. As they sat across from each other, Adrian reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, reassuring. "You don't have to go," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "We could skip the wedding. I don't want you to do this for anyone but yourself." Zara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude for the man who had stood by her side. "I'm not doing this for anyone but me," she replied. "This is my moment, Adrian. I need to show him that I'm not broken. I've built this empire, I've raised our children, and I've done it all on my terms. This wedding, it's not about revenge. It's about showing the world that I am who I am because I chose to be. No one else has the power to define me." Adrian nodded, a proud smile tugging at his lips. "Then go show them, Zara. Show them who you are." The day of Ethan's wedding arrived, and Zara was ready. She had chosen a gown that was nothing short of spectacular, an emerald green dress that clung to her curves and flowed gracefully to the floor. It was elegant, timeless, and bold. The color of the dress symbolized growth, renewal, and strength. It was the perfect choice for the woman she had become. Her twins, now 5 years old, were dressed in matching suits, their little hands held tightly by hers as they walked beside her. The sight of her children, her true legacy, was enough to make her heart swell with pride. They had been her motivation, her driving force. They were the proof that Ethan's cruelty was a lie. They were the proof that she was not barren. She was whole, and she was a mother. As they arrived at the venue, the car slowly pulled up to the grand entrance. The wedding venue was surrounded by towering trees, their leaves just beginning to turn golden in the late autumn air. The sound of laughter and music drifted through the open windows of the building. Zara took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the scene ahead. This was it, her moment. The doors of the venue were wide open, and guests milled about, their conversations buzzing with excitement. Ethan stood at the altar, his back to the entrance, his smile bright and confident. Sophie stood beside him, her smile a little too wide, her eyes sparkling with a mix of triumph and uncertainty. She had no idea what was about to happen. Zara stepped out of the car, her heels clicking sharply against the cobblestone pathway. She held her twins' hands tightly, her posture straight and proud. With each step, she felt more empowered, more in control of her destiny. The past was behind her, and the future was hers to define. The crowd's chatter began to die down as Zara approached the entrance. Whispers filled the air as people turned to look at her, their eyes widening in shock and awe. The moment had arrived. As Zara entered the grand hall, the room seemed to freeze. Guests turned, their eyes widening in disbelief. The gasps of surprise and admiration filled the air, and cameras began flashing, capturing the moment. For a second, everything was still. Zara's heart raced, but she kept her composure. She was no longer Ava, the woman who had been discarded. She was Zara, the woman who had risen above it all. Ethan's smile faltered as his eyes locked with hers. Recognition dawned on his face, but it was too late. The woman he had once called barren, the woman he had thrown away, was now standing in front of him, more beautiful, more successful, and more powerful than he could ever imagine. Sophie, standing next to Ethan, looked pale. She had no idea what was happening, but she could sense the shift in the room. She turned to Ethan, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Who is she?" she whispered, her eyes searching Ethan's for answers. Ethan's eyes remained locked on Zara. Tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. This was supposed to be his moment, his celebration. But now all the attention was on the woman he had discarded, the woman he had betrayed. Zara didn't say a word. She didn't need to, her presence was enough. The crowd surged around her, asking for selfies, autographs, and a moment with the woman who had become a symbol of triumph. Zara smiled graciously, but her eyes never left Ethan. He was standing there, frozen, his world crumbling around him. This was his reckoning. As the room buzzed with whispers, Sophie's voice cut through the noise. "You told me she was barren," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You told me she couldn't have children. You lied to me, Ethan." Ethan's face turned red with embarrassment, but he couldn't speak. His lies had caught up to him, and there was no escaping the truth. Sophie, realizing the depth of his deception, turned on her heel and walked away. She had been used, just as Ava had been, and now the truth was exposed for all to see. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate Ethan's new life had turned into a public humiliation. His guests, once there to celebrate his union with Sophie, were now flocking around Zara. no one was paying attention to him anymore. He had become the joke, the man who had thrown away a diamond for a piece of glass. As the chaos unfolded, Zara stood tall, her twins by her side, her grace unshaken. She had not come for revenge. She had come to live her truth, to show the world that she had not been broken by Ethan's cruelty, and in doing so, she had destroyed him without lifting a finger. Zara's rise was not about hatred or revenge. It was about proving to herself, and to everyone who had ever doubted her, that she was more than enough. She was not defined by Ethan's rejection. She was Zara, and she had built an empire that would outlive him, a legacy that would shine long after his name had been forgot. As she left the wedding, the crowd followed her, still captivated by her presence. Ethan stood there, humiliated, as Sophie disappeared into the night. He had lost everything, not just his reputation, but his chance at happiness. Zara, on the other hand, walked away with her head held high, her heart full of peace, and the knowledge that she had truly won. The evening after the wedding was a blur of flashing lights and whispered conversations. Zara had not expected such a public confrontation, but it had been the culmination of a journey she had set in motion years ago. As the dust settled from the chaotic aftermath, Zara found herself standing at the threshold of an entirely new phase of her life, a phase that no longer belonged to Ethan, Sophie, or anyone else from her past. It was her own. Adrian had been there, of course, through it all. He had known that she would walk into the wedding as Zara, not as the broken woman Ethan had left behind. They both understood the significance of that moment. Zara had come full circle. She had done it all on her own terms, not out of spite, but out of a desire to prove to herself, to her children, and to the world that she was not defined by anyone else's narrative. After the wedding, they returned to their apartment in the city. The twins, exhausted from the day's excitement, had fallen asleep in their arms. As Zara looked out the window, the city lights twinkling below her, a sense of peace settled in her heart. She was exactly where she needed to be. She had reclaimed her life and her dignity. Adrian sat beside her on the sofa, pulling her close. "You did it, Zara," he said softly. "You showed them." Zara smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I didn't do it for anyone but myself," she replied. "This isn't about Ethan. It's about me and what I've built. This is my victory." As they sat in silence, the weight of everything they had accomplished together settled between them. They had come so far. From the small apartment she had lived in after Ethan's rejection to the penthouse they now shared, to the empire Zara had built from nothing, everything had led her to this moment. But now that she had risen from the ashes, the real work had just begun. Zara wasn't just a survivor. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman whose ambition had no limits. Zara had always been business savvy, even before her transformation. But now, with the success of her modeling career, she saw an opportunity to turn her newfound fame into something bigger. She wasn't content with just being a household name in fashion. She wanted to build a legacy, something that would outlast her and continue to make an impact long after she was gone. It started with Zara Luxe, a luxury fashion brand that embodied her vision of strength, elegance, and resilience. Her brand wasn't just about clothing, it was about empowering women to take control of their own narratives. Zara had been told she was broken, but now she was telling other women that they were anything but. She built the brand on the principle that true luxury wasn't just about expensive materials, it was about owning your story, your power, and your future. The first Zara Luxe boutique opened in New York's Fashion District. It was a glamorous affair, and the store quickly became a destination for high-end shoppers. Each piece in the collection reflected Zara's journey, feminine yet powerful, bold yet refined. It was exactly what she had envisioned, a brand that celebrated women who had overcome adversity, who had transformed their pain into something beautiful. But Zara didn't stop there. She expanded into cosmetics, launching a line of skincare and beauty products designed to make women feel just as confident in their skin as they did in their clothes. The product range was carefully curated, using high-quality ingredients and sustainable packaging. This wasn't just about beauty, it was about empowering women to feel their best in every aspect of their lives. Zara was not only interested in building her brand, though she also wanted to make a meaningful difference in the world. Having come from a place of struggle and hardship, she understood what it meant to be given an opportunity and how important it was to pass that opportunity on to others. She founded the Zara Foundation, dedicated to empowering young girls and women around the world. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide education, resources, and mentorship to women who had been marginalized or silenced. Zara knew that the road to success wasn't always clear or easy, but she was determined to provide a pathway for others to follow. The foundation funded scholarships for young girls to attend school, supported women's health initiatives, and offered mentorship programs in business and leadership. Through the Zara Foundation, Zara was able to give back in ways that truly mattered. She traveled to remote villages in Africa, Asia, and South America, meeting women who had been given a chance to pursue their dreams because of the foundation's support. She saw firsthand the transformative power of education, and it fueled her desire to do more. As Zara's empire grew, so did her influence. She became a sought-after speaker at international conferences, where she spoke about women's empowerment, entrepreneurship, and the importance of resilience. Her words resonated with people from all walks of life, and she was invited to share her story on global platforms. Her business empire extended beyond fashion and beauty. Zara began investing in sustainable industries, renewable energy, eco-friendly products, and green technologies. She wanted to leave a legacy not just in the fashion world, but in the world at large. She wanted to show that success didn't have to come at the expense of the planet or people's well-being. As her empire grew, so did her role as a philanthropist. She opened several schools for girls in underprivileged areas, providing access to quality education where it was most needed. Zara's foundation was instrumental in building programs that helped women escape abusive situations and start their own businesses. Her efforts were recognized globally, and she was named one of the most influential women of the decade. Through it all, Adrian stood by her side, unwavering in his love and support. Their relationship had only grown stronger as they worked together to build a life that was meaningful and fulfilling. Adrian was not just her partner in business, but her equal in every sense. He shared her vision and supported her dreams, and together, they raised their children with love, patience, and care. Their twin boys, now growing older, were a reflection of their parents' strength and love. Zara made sure to balance her work life with her family life, ensuring that her children knew the value of hard work, compassion, and integrity. They were being raised to appreciate not only their privilege, but also the responsibility that came with it. Zara was finally living the life she had always dreamed of. She had everything she could have wanted: success, love, a family. And yet, there was still a part of her that couldn't forget where she had come from. The woman who had been discarded by Ethan, who had been told she was broken, had become a beacon of hope and strength for so many others. But even as she lived this new life, Zara could not forget the man who had once tried to define her, Ethan. He had underestimated her, rejected her, and tried to ruin her life. And though she had long since moved on, there were still moments when the memory of his betrayal crept back into her thoughts. The final blow came when Ethan's name surfaced once again in the media. Rumors swirled that his business was faltering. His arrogance had alienated his partners, and his once glamorous lifestyle was now teetering on the edge of collapse. Sophie, his new wife, had distanced herself from him as the cracks in his facade began to show. He had lost everything: his reputation, his money, and most importantly, his integrity. Zara couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. She had always known that Ethan's lies would catch up to him eventually, and now they had, but she didn't take pleasure in his downfall. Instead, she felt a sense of peace. Ethan had tried to destroy her, but she had risen above it all. She had built an empire, a family, and a legacy that no one could take from her. The sun had just begun to set, casting a golden glow over the city skyline as Zara stood by her window, her gaze distant, lost in thought. The past few years had been a whirlwind: success, transformation, and triumph. But as she watched the light flicker across the bustling streets, she felt a pang of curiosity about the past she had left behind. The invitation arrived on a quiet morning, slipping through her letterbox unnoticed. It was embossed in gold, elegant and formal, addressed to Miss Zara. She tore the envelope open, expecting yet another offer for an endorsement or a business opportunity. But the words inside stopped her in her tracks. Ethan Matthews was getting married. For a brief moment, the world seemed to freeze. Zara stood still, her mind racing. Ethan, his name alone conjured up memories of pain, betrayal, and the journey she had traveled to escape him. And now, after all these years, he was trying to invite her back into his life, not with a simple gesture of reconciliation, but with an invitation to his wedding. His desire to humiliate her was clear. He had no idea that Zara and Ava were one and the same. She leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. There was no need for revenge, not in the traditional sense. Her rise to power, her success, her wealth, These were her answers to everything Ethan had said to her, everything he had tried to take from her. She had already won, but there was something poetic about this moment. Ethan had once discarded her, believing she was nothing without him, believing she was broken. Now he was offering her the chance to watch him marry someone else, but he had no idea that it was she who had truly triumphed. The wedding was nothing short of extravagant. The venue was a grand ballroom, adorned with chandeliers that shimmered like diamonds. The guests were all high profile, the air thick with the hum of luxury and excess. Ethan, standing at the altar, had a smile plastered on his face. He was dressed to perfection, but his eyes betrayed him. He had no idea what was coming. Sophie, radiant in her gown, stood by his side, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. Their world, meticulously constructed by lies and carefully curated appearances, was about to shatter. The doors to the ballroom swung open, and the room fell into a hushed silence. Zara entered, her presence commanding the space. She was the embodiment of grace, elegance, and power. Her gown shimmered like liquid gold, her eyes focused, her steps deliberate. In each hand she held the hands of her twin boys, who looked every bit the picture of innocence and joy. The room gasped. Whispers began to swirl like a tornado. Guests turned from their positions, abandoning the ceremony to rush toward Zara to capture this moment, to bask in her presence. The cameras flashed, the buzz grew louder, and Ethan's smile faltered. His eyes widened in disbelief. He recognized her. Zara didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She simply walked down the aisle, the attention of the room now fully on her. Her rise, her transformation was complete. The woman who had been cast aside as barren was now the center of it all. Her success spoke louder than any words. Sophie, who had been standing with Ethan, turned to him in confusion. The truth slowly dawned on her. This was not some glamorous, nameless celebrity. This was Ava Daniels, the woman Ethan had once discarded, the woman he had cruelly called barren. Sophie's face turned pale as the realization hit her. She turned to Ethan, her voice sharp and accusing. "You lied," she whispered, loud enough for those closest to hear. "You told me she was barren, you destroyed her, and you used me." The guests, who had been swept up in the excitement of the wedding, now stood still. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. Sophie, her face flushed with anger and betrayal, turned on her heel and walked away from the altar, leaving Ethan standing there, frozen and humiliated. Ethan stammered, trying to find words, but they escaped him. The carefully constructed world he had built, the image of perfection he had created, was collapsing before him. No longer was the confident, powerful man he had once been. Ethan now exposed, his cruelty laid bare for everyone to see. Zara, on the other hand, didn't look back. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering. The room was hers now. Her empire was hers. And Ethan, he was nothing but a distant memory, a ghost from her past. She smiled for the cameras, posed for the selfies, and embraced the adoration. Her boys stood by her side, their innocent joy a sharp contrast to the twisted reality Ethan had created for himself. The years that followed Zara's grand entrance at Ethan's wedding were filled with more triumphs and victories. She had already achieved everything Ethan had once told her she couldn't. Her empire was solidified, her name synonymous with success and resilience. She was no longer Ava, the woman discarded and humiliated. She was Zara, the woman who had risen from the ashes. Her brand, Zara Luxe, expanded into new industries. Fashion, beauty, real estate, and philanthropy, her reach knew no bounds. She used her platform to empower others, especially women who had been silenced or broken by the cruelty of others. Her foundation, dedicated to providing education and opportunities for underprivileged girls, became a beacon of hope across the globe. Her twin boys, now growing up in the light of their mother's success, were taught the values of resilience, compassion, and humility. They knew the story of their mother, of how she had been cast aside but had risen to become something far greater than anyone could have ever imagined. Adrian, her partner and now husband, stood by her side through it all. His love for her was unconditional. Together, they balanced their personal and professional lives, building a future not just for themselves, but for their children and the world around them. And Ethan, he faded into obscurity. His arrogance had led to his downfall, and his name was now synonymous with manipulation and deceit. He had lost everything, not just his reputation, but the love he had once taken for granted. Zara, however, remained untouchable. She didn't need revenge, her success was her revenge. She had built an empire, created a legacy, and proved that no one, especially someone as cruel and blind as Ethan, could ever break her. As Zara stood at the pinnacle of her success, surrounded by her family and her legacy, she knew one thing for certain: she was whole, she was perfect. And no one, least of all Ethan, could ever take that away from her. Zara's story is not just about success or wealth. It's a story of transformation, of taking something painful and turning it into something powerful. It's about choosing dignity, self-worth, and the courage to rise above the lies and cruelty of others. In the end, Zara didn't need to fight with weapons or words. She fought with her actions, with her success, and with the unwavering belief that she was worthy of everything she had earned. And in doing so, she became the symbol of strength and resilience that the world would never forget.